Hi and welcome back to the channel. It is week 3 of August and I have some books to talk about. It's Sunday again. I meant to start filming these clips a little bit earlier, but I had a lovely little cold come on, and on Friday my throat was sore, and then Saturday. But anyway, this is the first day that I felt up to recording some updates, and I have quite a few books to talk about. Now I'm going to talk about 3 of them fairly quickly. These are 3 graphic novels that I've read this week. I mentioned that now that I have finished Fablehaven Book 5, I'd have more physical reading time, and I thought I was going to go to ARCs, but I wanted to go ahead and read the graphic novels that I had on my shelf so that if they're any good, I could take them into my classroom at the end of the month, because I really want my students to be reading during their independent reading time. And a lot of them are really reluctant readers, and so the way to get them reading is with graphic novels. So, to start off, the first one of those that I read was Escape from Mr. Limoncello's Library. This apparently is a graphic novel adaptation of a book. I have not read the actual book, but I loved this graphic novel adaptation. It's like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, only it's a library. And I just thought it was really cool. This one, I think, was probably my favorite out of these 3 that I have read. So this will definitely be going on the library, but not until the end of the month. The next one that I read was Spy School, the graphic novel. This is by Stuart Gibbs, same guy who wrote the Moonbase Alpha series that I finished earlier this year. I will mention I got both of these for my birthday. I had put them on my book outlet wish list. So this, again, I think is a graphic novel adaptation of a regular novel. I'm going to be looking for more of those. In fact, I've purchased several for the intent of putting them in my classroom library. I don't remember which ones they were, but they are graphic novel focused. I think some of them were regular novels, but I plan to get to them as they come in and then put them on my classroom library shelves, because I don't put anything on the shelves that I haven't read already. Back to this book. In this book, the main character wants to be a spy. He plays this CIA, I think it's CIA, FBI, I don't remember which, online game about being a spy, and then he gets randomly chosen to go to this super secret spy school. He was chosen sort of as an experiment. He doesn't know that and still wants to do his best. So this was a lot of fun, and I think that this one will definitely appeal to the male readers in my classroom. The one of those that I read most recently that I'm not 100% sure about, but I probably will still take it into my classroom, is Camp Prodigy. This was my latest comic subscription book. At least I think it was the July book, because the August one is probably still on my shelves over in the other room. This one is set at a summer camp for musicians, string musicians primarily. The main character, Tate, picked up the viola the previous year because they heard this other character, Eli, play or practice before they were supposed to go on for a soloist. They ended up choking and not going on, but Tate was inspired by that, but has struggled with it, wants to become a lot better, but really doesn't know where they fall along that line. Also, they are struggling to come out as non-binary, and Eli has identified as being non-binary. There were some things that I enjoyed about it. I liked the way that the friendships developed and how they were coached along the way. But there were just a few things that kept pulling me out of the story as it was. As someone who played a string instrument all growing up, I played violin, started it in 4th grade when my school started offering it, played it through high school routinely, and then off and on in college. I haven't picked it up probably in over a decade. The idea of someone improving as much as Tate supposedly improves in 1 month, I just don't see it. That whole part of it was not as fleshed out as I think, or realistic I should say, as I think it should be. So I don't think that the author themselves has a lot of experience in, at least from the biography, in playing stringed instruments, which is fine. Their forte is clearly in writing and the concept art, you know, because they are the writer and illustrator of this graphic novel. And I get that if you don't have the experience in something like that, you're not necessarily going to be as proficient with knowing stuff like that. And then the other thing, which I appreciate, but also just felt a bit heavy-handed, was the focus on coming out and how everything was relating back to that idea. And it just really isn't something that's talked about a lot, at least at that level. I will say this, every single response to someone actually coming out, to Tate actually coming out to friends at the camp, to other people around, to his family, it was overwhelmingly, this makes me a little nervous, but because unfortunately I know that the reality is not this way, every single response that Tate got to their coming out was hugely positive. And all of the people that they came out to were super supportive and going above board and making sure that they did the right thing. And I wish that the reality were that this was the case, but it just took the suspension of disbelief a bit too far. I also wonder what kind of controversy this book would get in if someone from Moms for Liberty got a hold of it. I think they would rip this to shreds, which is completely unfair. They'd have a lot to say about it, even though everything that they would say would be almost completely invalid. Those are my personal opinions as me as a private citizen, putting that disclaimer out there. So I'm not 100% sure about this. It was fine. I think if the musical aspect of this had been a little bit more believable, I might be more inclined to put it on my shelves. But I was never able to fully immerse in this story, and it just made other things stick out, which felt unfortunate to me. I did also read 2 volumes of Spy Family, so I am basically caught up. I don't know if it's possible to get my hands on volume 11 yet, but I read volumes 9 and 10, and I read both volumes today because I had to wait a while before I could read volume 10. I had to wait on volume 9 to come in, and I had only 3 days left on my loan of volume 10, so I just went ahead and read both of those today. Volume 9 picks up at the tail end of that cruise that they were on, and it did also include some fighting scenes. I'm just not a fan of the way that Tatsuya Endo draws and narrates the fighting scenes because they don't really make any sense to me. Perhaps that's because I'm not really used to those kinds of scenes in manga and that art style. This is really one of the first manga series I've ever read, but perhaps this is because of the way that Tatsuya Endo has drawn them. That being said, 9 was a fine volume, but it felt really filler without a lot to connect it because it was tying off the whole arc, I guess you could say, of the whole cruise ship thing that they went on, and then trying to lead into what you got in volume 10. Some of the really good parts in volume 10, I loved the backstory on Twilight that we got in volume 10. And then the way that they tied back into the school part of it, I think whenever Anya is at the forefront of the story, this manga really shines. I think whenever you tie in the history of the characters to Anya, it also really builds. And the reason that we get the flashback to Twilight story is because of something that happened with Anya at the end of volume 9. Again, that connection there. And there's also more of Bond in these stories because obviously on the cruise ship, they're not taking the dog. I did appreciate that. And overall, I don't think this is doing absolutely amazing things, but I still love this family. And when it builds into that, I really enjoy it. Now we come to the books that I read as audiobooks. So we'll start with Forced by Blood. I wish that I had been able to like this more. It was a bit of a disservice to pick this up on the heels of Liar's Test that I finished off last week with. I'm not going to do another rant review. I had 2 of those in the last month. It's very shiny, and I don't have the actual cover that came with it because I thought this was so pretty. This again is building on the West African mythology, but it was very confusing once again. Not because of chronology, but because of terminology and the way that the different characters were interacting. Honestly, it's been so long and I was so confused that I can't really sink my mind into any of those details, which makes me trying to do a review 3 days later pretty difficult, which, I mean, my foggy head because of my head cold didn't really help that at all. I wish I remembered the details. I'm sitting here trying to remember some of the details with this, but I really can't remember. I think this is going to end up with 3.5 stars. I'm going to have to read some synopses. I mean, even looking at this, I don't know what scene that is from or could be from because I don't remember any characters being described like this. See, we've got another one. Some of the memories are coming back, but unfortunately, this is going to get unhauled. I think my overall rating for August is not going to be that great. So the next book that I picked up is Cruel Illusions. Again, a difficult one to read based on the cover, and I was going to take it off to see if we got anything, but it's just the imagery under here. So this is the oldest Fairy Loot book that I still had on my shelves, and when I picked it up, I went and looked at the overall ratings, and the ratings were very similar, or in a similar range to Force My Blood and Liar's Test. So that did not give me a lot of hope. I was like, wait, I'm gonna pick up another dud, a third dud in a row. Thankfully for me, it worked. I really enjoyed this. I'm not really sure why, because this does not seem like my kind of book. This is all vampire based. Vampires and magicians. Main character's mom was killed by a vampire, so she's long wanted to take revenge on them. And I'm looking in the viewfinder. I'm trying to hold this so that you can see the title, but if I move, you can't see it anymore. Anyway, she's trying to take revenge on them. She's interested in magic because that's what her parents used to do. Her father before he was killed in a mugging, and then her mother obviously before she was killed by a vampire. She's also, because both of her parents died when she was young, she and her much younger brother have been in the foster care system for years. But they finally found a family, a single mom with another boy of her own who seems like a really good fit. Her brother and the biological kid get along really well. She's very mistrusting and doesn't want to like the family. And so she takes this opportunity to join up with a troupe of magicians. But there's a contest going on behind that, and there's another guy that gets involved that is trying to protect her. A little bit of a love triangle, but not that bad, actually. It's kind of funny to think about this. And then you have the idea of trying to define the vampires, with also the way that the magicians are operating. And this whole, it's not a game per se, but every year each of these troops brings in an apprentice and they compete to see who is going to be able to join as an actual magician and become immortal. Some years it's more than one. This year it's just one. And that's the course of this whole story. I won't say anything else, but the way that Margie Fuston dives into the complexity between what makes a vampire, what makes a magician, who's good, who's bad, I thought was really well done. And also, as far as I know, this is just a standalone, which I really appreciate because this easily could have been made into a series and drawn out way too long. Was this absolutely amazing literature? No. Am I a fan of vampires? Also, no. But somehow this book worked for me. So I think this is going to get a 4-star. This is actually going to stay on my shelves, and it was like a breath of fresh air after a couple duds. So I was reinvigorated as far as my ratings went. And then I got into A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. And I've heard really good things about this. This is more middle grade leaning, although I wouldn't say it's 100% middle grade. It could be easily read as middle grade, but I don't think it was written as middle grade, if that makes any sense. So the main character is 14 years old, which lends it to being more middle grade. But there are a lot of stakes in everything that's going on, and it gets dark-ish at points, which, I mean, middle grade novels can do that as well. This is the longest work I've read by T. Kingfisher because both Thornhenge and Nettle and Bone were shorter than this, but obviously her newest one, A Sorceress Comes to Call, is, I think, about this length or slightly longer. but I'll be getting to that soon, hopefully. This is just so enjoyable. So in this world, there are what are known as magickers. They can work a particular type of magic, and most of them are fairly low level. They can work their particular magic with one specific thing. And for Mona, her particular type of magic is working with bread. Anything to do with bread, she can work a little bit of magic in. She thinks there's not much to it. Then one morning, she's going to open her aunt's bakery and discovers a dead body. And things unfold from there. She has a carnivorous sourdough familiar, as well as a gingerbread man that she's brought to life. And I just really enjoyed this book. This was so much fun to read. And I think this is going to get a 4.5 stars. I haven't put it through Compile. I just finished it earlier today. So I really enjoyed this. And I have decently enjoyed every bit of T. Kingfisher's fantasy. I haven't read any of her books that lean more horror because that's just not my genre. I probably would enjoy them too. I'm just going to stick with her fantasy books. Okay, once again, I'm back over here to wrap up the vlog. I have 3 books to talk about. 2 I have physically. 1 I read as an audiobook, but don't have a physical copy of. I don't have an arc of it or anything. I just put a hold on the audiobook because I think it might be on the Goodreads fantasy list. That's Spin of Fate, but I'll get to that in a moment. The first one that I'm going to talk about in this clip, I think it's like book 6 or 7 that I've read because I read 2 manga and one, I can't remember. Anyway, let's get back on track. Anyway, you know, before I get into this, my brain is so packed full. These days, they've been good. I've gotten done what I've needed to teaching the kids and everything, but there's just so much, and I'm just at this point where I'm just like, I'm gonna do enough to get enough planned to get us through the next day. That might be part of why my brain is so scattered right now. I'm not pushing myself to necessarily read a ton. I'm just keeping on, chugging away at what I'm reading. I've gotten the daily page count that I need to meet my goal way down. At the beginning of the month, it was like over 300, and now it's like 180, 150, somewhere in there. So those graphic novels, the manga, etc., they definitely helped with the page count. But back to this book. This is the last of the Rick Riordan Presents imprints books that I have physically. I'll have to double check to see if any of the others have come out yet. I don't think they have. There's another YA book coming out that's not part of a series. And there's 2 more. One is the 2nd book in the Pauamoa series, and the other is the 3rd in the Paulo Santiago series. I have arcs of both of those. I don't know when they're coming out this year. I know they're coming out this year, but they haven't quite come out yet, if I remember correctly. When they come out, I will get copies of. This is technically the 4th in the YA branch of the Rick Riordan Presents imprints. There is 1 duology. I've read both. I own one. One of them came in a book box, and I got the 2nd one as an arc. The other one I read as an arc earlier this year. That one was A Drop of Venom. That was absolutely fascinating. I was really intrigued by that one. The one that comes out later this year is The Darkness Becomes Her, I think is the name of it. And I think that one, just like this one, leans more towards horror. At least I know that one leans way more towards horror. This was sort of mystery horror. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Which is an interesting take for this imprint. It's kind of nice in some respects that it's branching out a little bit. But at the same time, a lot of the reasons for this imprint were to expand the voices that we heard and the mythologies that we heard, make it more own voices that were similar to Percy Jackson. This did not feel like it fit this imprint at all. That was the thing that felt weird for me. And that's pretty much the only negative thing that I can talk about with this book. I went into this book expecting something way more typical of a Rick Riordan Presents imprints book, which is very much more rooted in mythology. This one does not feel like it is. I know that there are aspects of it, but this one was very much more of a murder, mystery, supernatural horror almost. Not dark, not super horror dark. I've never said that word so many times, and it is so difficult to pronounce and make sure that you know, that others know what you're trying to say. It was much more on those rounds, those ends, than anything else I've ever read before. Part of a slightly lower rating for me was the fact of my expectations going into it because of the publishing imprint that it was part of. At the same time, this was absolutely fascinating. So the main character is the daughter of a woman who was known and sort of shunned for being a witch, for being more tied into the native religion. This takes place on a very small Caribbean island. I don't know if it's real or not, called St. Virgil. There was another one I read recently that was very similar to that. And you find out a little bit before this that there was a terrible accident that was definitely foul play that left her father dead and her mother in a coma. And she's also been slightly shunned by this. She was going to try to leave the island with this other guy who is the son of a couple that is basically owns the island. They're very rich, they're very controlling, etc. He does not like that. He doesn't want to be part of it. They both want to leave the island. But after this happens to her parents, she decides she can't leave. She breaks up with this guy and pushes him away. You can tell she clearly still has feelings for him. But at the start of the book, she's dating somebody else. She's working with, and the family relationships are very complicated in here, someone close to some of the upper echelons that never treated her right when she was in school. She's 18, so she's graduated from high school. But they're running this shop. The other girl is very privileged. She was given this shop as a way to show responsibility. But does she show responsibility? No. She works with the main character to put on fake seances. But there is a connection that the main character has with the supernatural. She doesn't necessarily know that it's real. She doesn't necessarily want to acknowledge it, but it sort of seeps out slightly in what's going on in these fake seances and things like that. There ends up being a string of murders on the island at the time of this book. And people are focusing on that. And the guy that is supposedly the murderer, he's very shifty, he's very suspicious. He comes into their shop, and that's how they get tangled into it. But there is this myth and folklore and this being and deals being made and like souls being taken and people being twisted to commit horrific acts weaves its way throughout this book. So it's part murder mystery, but also it's got this overarching tone of what on earth is going on? Is any of this real? I found myself fascinated by this. Some of it was creepy, but it wasn't gory. It wasn't gratuitous. It made sense and it fit with it. It hooked me in a way that books like this, stories like this wouldn't necessarily do. And I just wish that I had read it separately from being part of the Rick Riordan Presents imprints. That being said, however, I don't think I would have picked it up had it not been part of this imprint. So catch-22 with that. But I found myself enjoying this a lot more than I thought I would. The next book that I read is The Barren Grounds by David A. Robertson, who is an Indigenous author. I believe he's Cree. This is book 1 in a series, and this was one that I picked up through a couple years ago now, the Owl Crate Black Friday sale. This was one of their Owl Crate Junior boxes. They don't do Owl Crate Junior anymore, which is a shame. But this is one that I was super interested in because of the ties back to Indigenous culture. This is a fantasy book, but a large part of it also takes place in the quote-unquote real world. The main character is an Indigenous girl who was either given up or taken away, more than likely taken away from her mother when she was 3. Never knew her. What she believes is that her mother gave her up, didn't care for her anymore, and she's been in this system ever since then. She's upper middle grade age at the time of this. And she's in a foster home situation where and I think she's been there 2 months. These foster parents are doing their best with them. And recently they've taken in another boy who is also Indigenous. I believe they're both Cree. I'm not 100% certain on that because when I'm listening to it via audiobook, I don't necessarily see some of the smaller details like that. But she puts a lot of herself, her heritage, how she interacts with people at arm's length, which is very typical for kids in foster care. And through a series of events that start happening, it's not explained exactly, but they get this opportunity to go to Misiwa, which this is book 1 of the Misiwa Saga, in a very similar manner to Chronicles of Narnia, which is actually mentioned in here. And there are talking animals, talking walking animals. And there's sort of a parable thing going on in Misiwa that they have to try to solve and help. And time doesn't work the same way, so she thinks her brother, her foster brother, has gone missing, like he's gone off. It's been a couple hours for her, but it's been 2 weeks for him. So time flows differently in this place than in the quote-unquote real world. So about a third of it takes place through the real world, has all of her explorations into what does it mean, her issues with her foster family, both foster parents and her foster brother, and the relationships with those. Her foster brother, Eli, was more recently taken from the home. I don't know if whether it was deaths or whatever, but she also resents him because he identifies with that culture more. He has that culture to remember. She was taken when she was 3. She doesn't feel genuinely part of that culture because she never was a part of it, at least that she can remember. I loved this so much. I loved the exploration of those deep issues of her trying and struggling to reconnect with her heritage, the way that Robertson handled the fantastical aspect of it and left the door open for them to go back to Misiwa. Very well done. I will definitely be continuing in this series. The book that I just finished a little bit earlier today, as I mentioned, was Spin of Fate by A.A. Vora. I had seen this periodically on different booktube videos, so I thought, why not? Go ahead and put a hold on the audiobook through Libby. If it comes up, I'll read it, and it may or may not help. I've heard really good things about it. Part of me, for some reason, thought that it was fantasy romance, so I was a little nervous about it. I think I saw some copies being given away in one of the videos about ApollyCon, which is all about a fantasy romance book convention. Spin of Fate is not fantasy romance. Not at all. There's some inklings of like a romantic attraction between a handful of the characters. It's not fantasy romance at all. I found myself very intrigued by what was going on in this book because you have a very interesting setup. 3 different characters in slightly different situations. And the setup of this world is that there are 4 realms and they are separated. I don't remember the name of it, and I didn't have it to see because I don't have the book physically. But they're separated in a way, and it's supposed to be based on the spin of your soul. I don't understand how souls spin or why they spin, but that is a fundamental concept of this world, of this story. World building in here was, I think, well done. And so there are 2 basically lower realms and 2 higher realms. Most of the action takes place in the 2 middle. The female main character, who's on the younger side, she was born into the middle lower realm. And part of the lore is that if you sin, you go down. You lower down, basically. And the more bad things you do, the more likely you are to stay in that lower realm or even go down to what some might consider quote-unquote hell, the very lowest realm. But supposedly, if you're good, you can get your soul spinning the quote-unquote right way and spinning fast enough to get to the next realm above. Very complicated, but explained really well. And so the first main character, at the very beginning, she was born in that slightly lower realm. And so she's like, what did I ever do wrong? Was my soul just born wrong? And that's one of the driving questions. She's with her mother, who's an outcast, who's a fairly quote-unquote evil or hard person. And somehow this main character stumbles upon a portal that she can use and somehow is able to go into that upper middle realm. She doesn't want to be there. Her mother basically forces her there. She doesn't want to be there. She keeps trying to do these things to get back to her mother. So that's one character. Another character is a guard in this middle upper realm that she encounters in various ways when she tries to get herself in trouble so that she can quote unquote sin and descend down to find her mother. He is one of those guys who feels very strongly about doing the right thing, believes very strongly in this religion, always wants to do the right thing. She sort of manipulates him as like, oh no, you're hurting me, just so she can get an advantage, elbow him out of the way and leave. So he's another one of the characters. And then the third character is someone who is still and has always been in that same realm where she was born. And he is one of the last members of a very small clan. They're down to 6 members in this lower realm. And they're trying to fight and survive. They're trying to get him out of a certain place, which is near a volcano, I think. These 3 characters end up coming together to work with another faction called the Balancers. And you end up, it seems like you have 2 main overall factions. You have Preservation, obviously from the name, those are people who want to keep things the same. And Preservation is part of taking that guy who was born in the middle upper realm and sending him down into this lower realm to spy on what's happening down there. And then you also have the Balancers. These are people who, from the name, you get the idea that they want to balance things out. They want to make things more equitable. At least that's the goal of the stated goal of the organization. And somehow all 3 of these characters end up working together. They become a team of sorts, training to be part of the Balancers. But of course, with this sort of complexity, nothing is ever what it seems. And reveals happen, you find out more and more. And all 3 of these characters have people that they trust and they believe in, only to have that trust and belief be absolutely shattered. And they have to pick up the pieces and figure out what side am I going to be on, and am I going to betray this other person that I got into a team with. It gets so complicated, so complex. I think when I go into book 2, I'm going to need to do like a summary recap. I'm definitely going to be purchasing the book. Some sort of way of trying to get my head around all of the complexity and all of the reveals that just come steamrolling at the end. I'm so glad that I had my expectations lower, thinking it was a fantasy romance, or it might have been a fantasy romance, because that left the door wide open for these books to completely surpass my expectation. Okay, so thanks to the 3 graphic novels that I read over the weekend and towards the end of the last week, plus the 2 manga volumes that I read over the weekend, I read a total of 11 works, 11 books, graphic novels, mangas, etc. So that's a pretty big number, especially for how overwhelmed I have felt this week. Overwhelmed in a good way. And I also want to mention, yes, I know I wear this in practically every clip, but when I get home, this is my comfort clothing. This is my current comfort sweatshirt. I know I've had other sweatshirts that have been my current comfort sweatshirt, but I don't wear it super long, and also it does get washed regularly. I've read 11 items. Some of them not so great. We did have a 2.5 star here, but the vast majority of these, pretty much all of them, save for Spin of Fate, were 4 stars. And that for me is a good rating. I found myself very intrigued by these. Actually, I think that Barren Grounds is going to end up as a 4.5 star as well. So 2 4.5 stars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 4 stars. You know what? I keep misremembering. A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, also 4.5 stars. So I had 3 4.5 stars, 7 4 stars, and 1 unfortunate 2.5 stars. So overall, I don't think that August's rating is going to be my highest. I think it might be one of my lowest monthly ratings. I'm enjoying the breadth of reading that I'm having. I'm trying to turn this stack around. We shall see what books I get into next week. So I have several still over here. I don't think I'm going to get to all of them. And then I have a TBR for Aurelian for Magical Readathon coming up in September. We shall see what that brings. I don't know why I'm acting like I'm wrapping things up. This is only week 3. I've still got another week of August to get some reading done. Well, a weekend and some days. There you go. These are all the books that I read in the 3rd full week of August. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.